Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Reed.
We kept our guest on this podcast over by 12 minutes or 15 minutes. So we didn't get to keep her along for the ride, but
first time that's ever happened.
Sorry.
No, I caught that.
So this episode we're doing with one of our favorite folks in the industry, which is Joya, and she works for Rivergate KW, but we refer to them as RKW, and so do they. But they're an up and coming company, I say up and coming,
probably beyond up and coming now. But
yeah, it's funny. They always talk about as if they're startups, as if they're a startup, but they're 4 years old, maybe.
Yeah, in that neighborhood, and
yeah,
probably somewhere between 50 and 60 properties at least, right?
Yeah, they've grown a lot in that time. They're moving and shaking in the southeast region.
They're a force.
Yeah, so we've known Joya for years, but she's their VP of marketing. Well, we didn't think there would be a better person to ask about or try to pull out of them information about the pitch. And I put this in air quotes, but the pitch, which is how do you go about pitching and working with different ownership groups?
Yeah, and I thought she was great, like divulging what she could, but then also protecting what she needed to. So super fascinating. And, we hit, as we always do, on past, present, future, that usually lends to some good dialogue, but just, how things have evolved when it comes to these presentations. And there's just some great nuggets in there and some wonderful anecdotes. So it was a fun one. I
loved how, just how put together it seems they are when they go through the process. And it's like, I would feel so comfortable if I was an owner. I don't just because I feel like if other people I've talked to about this, not on the record, but they'll be like, oh, what do you mean? Like people hire us, and they don't really seem to consider just consider. I'll leave it there.
Well, I think it's because so often, and there's still some of that. She hit that early, but just it's deal like knowing people. Deals are done by knowing people, and that's to me what's changed with the proliferation, right, of apartment communities. I mean, as you were pointing out, 2020 had the most new construction, right, by far, and that beat last year's record. Yep. And so inevitably, it can't just all be, hey, somebody, that's how you win business. Now you have to be more strategic. So very cool to hear that they are buttoned up, and not a surprise to me knowing.
And we'll have to do a follow up because there's so many questions I didn't get to, but I would love to know how that's going to change now and what they've prepared for, like I guess now you're saying it's officially a recession.
That's right. Yep.
Declared a recession, which was early. And I also love how two things about Joya. One, I love how she ribs us. She is like not one to let things go. So I think that's great. And two, I don't know if I've met another person, I can't think of one off the top of my head, that's more alert. Like she is just, I don't know what her coffee regimen is or whatnot, but you're not going to slide something past her. And her kids probably don't get away with much.
Yeah, no doubt. She's super focused. She reminds me of somebody that I used to work with closely. Yeah. I think you know who that is. So just a great episode. And again, thank her so much for the time. We love Joya.
Cool. Well, I think this is a good one, so stay tuned. All right, Joya, welcome to the podcast. And I feel like you were just telling this, you look more put together than we would have required for a audio only version of this, but you were just saying that you were with an ownership group this morning, right?
Yes. Touring an asset that is in lease up, just got TCO last week. So went to meet our client and walk and just look at the progress of construction. The model was being installed today. So just getting a feel for where the product is today.
Well, it's great, I guess, great timing or setup for this episode because we wanted to have you on specifically to talk about how, we'll usually get this done in the intro, but in case we don't hit this in the intro, you've been on the marketing side for quite some time and how the marketers engage with the owners and operators, but we're more interested right now in hearing about how you guys have an impact on operators and how, just kind of where that fits into the cycle. So like how early you have to get involved with the owner and then like how long you're with the building through the construction phase and all of that. But anyway, so Reed, I'll let you at least like start with the opening salvo, so I don't get us too far off of the original questions that you sent Joya, so she could prepare.
Yeah, well, my background's in sales, so I'm, always interested, I guess, to hear either anecdotally or, about fun pitches, but also, what kind of tactics are used, how are things changing when it comes to business development. And we, reflecting back, because a lot of my time had been spent in media before I got in multifamily, and we often would do experiential pitches and I remember doing one for Whole Foods. It was really fun when I was in Austin, and we brought their marketing director in, and we were looking at a bigger partnership at an enterprise level with Cox Media Group at the time, and we went all out. We had what was called this bat cave, and that's what we used to just theme out depending on who we were pitching, and that was just one of the ones that stood out. It was really fun. We went shopping and, did all sorts of stuff. I won't, give too much backstory on that, but I hadn't really heard, at least in multifamily examples of that. And maybe just because we hadn't gotten on that thread. And then I want to say is when we were in Atlanta, funny enough, and I feel like it was from some folks from Greystar that were talking about, how they were approaching pitches now. Because part of it was, and we were talking, as we often do, about Fiona a little bit. And it's like, so we're familiar with Greystar's stack. I'm sure you heard that term if RKW doesn't use the same, but that they go to market when they're trying to pitch owners and investors, like, here's our stack, and they kind of divide that up by department, right? And one of those, of course, is marketing. And we were like, well, that's interesting. And are you using technology and data more? And what does that sound like as far as part of your stack, how you're winning business? And so she shared some of that, which we'll keep there. But then she also said another thing that we like to do, and we don't do always, but we love the experiential pitch. And so that had me and David really kind of leaning in and making us think, well, who else is doing that? What else is happening out there? And then kind of bringing it to this point, I was telling David it'd be fun to do kind of a series of like, different POVs and topics within the industry, and have guests on, and obviously some of our best, top clients like you, and hear their perspectives and their anecdotes. And that's hopefully not too much background, Joy, but that's what led us to this. It's like, I can't imagine anybody saying no to Joya and Marcy, frankly. I bet they're terrific on their pitches, and nobody better to talk us through that to the extent you're comfortable, just what that sounds like. And like David said, the cycle is interesting to us too. And you probably saw a little bit of that in the questions, but as you talk about walking with this owner today, like, how far back did that relationship start? Obviously you guys have folks that invest in multiple assets, or, they have their own portfolios, but all of that's really interesting to us. But the real focus here is, the pitch, or the big pitch, as we say, what that sounds like, what that looks like from a marketing perspective.
Mm-hmm. You covered a lot of ground. There were probably about 5 questions in there. Where do you want to start?
Well, maybe should we start with like what the typical cycle is with like how you guys come in contact with a potential, I guess, client of your own?
Yeah. That's what I want to know is, when do you get, go ahead.
Well, so a lot of our business, we're still a very young company, but we've had some fast growth over the past 5 years. And a lot of that initially started with just being relationship based. Marcy and I and Holly have been in the industry for a really long time. Marcy in particular had a tremendous amount of contacts and long-term relationships. So she was able to lean into those relationships to get people to take a chance on us. And then from there, really, we do our thing, prove that, we know exactly what we're doing. We can provide exceptional service and results that matter for the clients. And so we've been able to grow by getting repeat business over and over. But we do have a senior VP of client services on our team, and he is responsible for a lion's share of the business development. So it's a combination of existing relationships and repeat business, and then John Zalkin really working just kind of from the ground level.
And then how long will someone like John, let's say, work a referral or something like that before he starts to bring in the whole team, like yourself and Marcy and the rest of you?
It really varies, and it's dependent upon the client and their timeline. He will work deals over a year.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get brought in really quickly. Some clients or developers are, they're really focused on the development of the site and construction, and it sneaks up on them, and then they realize, oh, we're 5 months out, or even in some cases we're 3 months out from delivering first units, and we don't have a brand or a name or signage. So we get pulled in then. And then there are other clients that are they're very experienced, and they engage us very early on. Sometimes we'll be consulting on a deal. They haven't even baked their floor plans, and we'll be consulting with them for 2 years before the community even opens up.
Wow. Yeah. And I've heard we had Brenda from Excelsior on. She's a marketing person out of Minneapolis. And she was saying that with them, they try to get involved as early as they can because they believe that the marketing, the way the building is architected and designed influences the marketing and the brand that she wants to pull together. And she had a lot of really good points. But as far as like you guys as a company, my understanding is that you don't there's no fees that you guys get until the building opens anyways. And then there's usually like a guarantee for that first year, right? Before you guys move into a management fee situation. So it sounds like you may be putting in a year of work ahead of really earning the customer. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I would say I mimic her sentiments 100%. The earlier we can get involved, the better it is, not just for the brand, but really programming the building, making sure we've got the right unit mix, that we're looking at the competitive set and also what's coming into the market. So it's always better to be involved very early on. But we charge a consulting fee. And that is credited back when we get into management fees, but there is a consulting fee when we're engaged that early on.
Wow, that's super interesting, and that's a nice model, protective model. So do you then, do you guys, I mean, this sounds like it would suck, but do you guys track hours then on how much work you're putting in?
We don't track hours.
Okay. Yeah. That was a decision we made day one. We were like, we don't want to track hours. It just starts to feel gross. So a lot of the companies and other vendors we work with are always like, oh, well, let's talk about time tracking and how this can make you better. It's like, meh, we'll do like some experimental, like journaling, as Reed calls it, like from time to time to see how we can cut down on processes, but not, and by the way, are you a processee or processes? Processes. Okay. Reed gets hung up on certain words, and I just didn't know if this would be one of them.
Yeah, a little bit. That's funny. That popped into my brain a couple of days ago driving down the road. It's weird that you just said that.
So do you want to move into your stack question now?
Yeah. Well, we could touch on that. I wanted to, because of the consulting, because I wasn't expecting that. Does that mean that your close ratio is kind of like insane because you already have them actually paying you guys? Not to mention, I can imagine how effective you and Marcy are, but I wanted to get at close ratio on this type of thing. And I was curious, and these are different profiles, right? RKW is obviously a big up and comer. As you said, you've been growing like crazy over the last 5 years. So I was curious, as you talk about these different cycles, sometimes it happens fast, sometimes it's a year of work, but how many pitches, ballpark, if you don't mind sharing, did you guys do in 2019? Or you could say what you're expecting in 20, and then what does the close rate look like?
Wow. I don't even know how many we did in 2019, to be honest with you. It was a lot. And when you sent over the questions, I was looking at one of your questions was, what's our closing ratio? So I tossed that at Marcy. I was like, we don't formally track it. But I said, I feel like we're about 60, 65%. She came back. She's like, I was actually going to tell you 60%. And we were really not formally tracking it. So that's just kind of a gut sense. We had some early years where it seemed like we couldn't lose, and that was really exciting. But as we are moving into new client relationships and new markets, that presents some challenges just because we have to build up teams in new markets. And so there's always a question there as to whether or not hiring a young management company in a new market makes a lot of sense. And we've had success there, but that's a lot harder to close a deal on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we kind of have the same thing. Like we know certain profiles, obviously call it sweet spot, whatever, we have higher close ratios, and with others that, are less familiar with us, or maybe put a higher priority on us or not being local, that is obviously going to compromise somewhat the close ratio. So I think appreciate you sharing that with us, but we can move to that stack. So I don't know how much you'd be willing to share just as far as how your go to market. We don't obviously want to ask you anything that would somehow tip your hand or the secret sauce to the competition. But what does that look like? I assume obviously it's some type of formula that you guys use in particular for your department when you guys are trying to win business.
So we actually don't pitch based on stacks, and I've done that before and with other previous companies, very familiar with it. But we really kind of look at our position today as still being very much a boutique firm, and we customize. Every pitch is customized to the deal we're trying to win and to the client, and what we are able to glean from early kind of relationship building and investigating what their ultimate goals are, what's important to them. And so we customize everything for every deal so far.
So when you talk about that customization, that usually comes after some sort of discovery. So you guys basically do a really thorough needs analysis, or assessment, and then you come back, with a custom presentation.
Yes, we have a custom presentation, and the discovery is it could be John, our VP of client relations, who's been honing that relationship, getting to know more about the deal. If it's a management transition, what are the pain points? We always shop transitions, probably giving away a secret, although that's not, a mind-blowing secret, but always try to get an assessment of what the current situation is and where there are opportunities for us to plug in. And sometimes not all of that information is given to us intentionally because they want to see what we're going to come up with. And so it's also what does our gut tell us is going to be important to this client. And then really as a fallback, you can never lose with your pitch being delivering results that matter. At the end of the day, clients want the truth and they want results. And that's what we're here to give them. And sometimes they don't want to hear the truth, and the results may not be what they hoped for, but it's our job to just really be honest with them and then show them how we can help them improve.
Well, I have to just clarify the results question. So I'm sure that different groups have different results expectations, but generally speaking, what are people sort of grading as like the result success? Because you mentioned that people will take a chance on you and that they maybe stick around or stay because you guys are getting the results that maybe they weren't getting elsewhere. And I'm sure that is all a factor of, as you said, the way that you guys program things, but also your team. So just walk me through what the typical like results, and if you have like a force rank order or something, that would be helpful.
So at the end of the day, people want you to meet or exceed their budgets. Clients have different goals. Sometimes it's occupancy and they want to sit at 98%. And some clients are about pushing rent. And so you have to understand what their goals are and achieve or beat those goals. Sometimes it's about velocity, especially for lease ups. We work with a lot of merchant builders that are just trying to get leased up as quick as possible so they can sell or pre-sell. So the results really are dependent upon what the client is looking for, what their ultimate goal is. And are they going to be a long-term hold or are they looking to sell?
Right. And how often then are you guys calling their baby ugly? Meaning like they have the wrong expectations and you have to help level set because otherwise you're going to be in a pickle 6 months down the line.
That's where Marcy comes in. She's able to not call the child ugly, but point out where the child has opportunity to learn to walk better.
Nice.
Well, stay on this just a second because I was going to go there too. How are you guys setting expectations? Do you do it up front or do they tell you this is what we expect and then you have to react to that? Like, I'm sure that there's examples of both, but just didn't know how you initially kind of enter into expectations. And then, I know you guys recently brought on an analyst, and a lot of that was to try and pull together the disparate data and offer, I guess, better stories and also better insights internally. So didn't know how if he's also part of this now, like in helping with the expectation setting. But yeah, if you don't mind, just expanding just a little bit there.
Sure. A lot of it revolves around writing a budget and agreeing upon a budget. That answers a lot of questions, and a lot of their ultimate goal comes out when you are looking at and putting together a budget. So, is it velocity? Is it rents? And we did bring in an analyst really because about 40% of our portfolio is at lease up, and we were really trying to understand what is the best pre-leasing strategy. Should we let the clients know? Should we be guiding them towards renting out a temporary office space 90 or 120 days prior to opening their building? Do they need to build mock-ups in these temp spaces? Are hard hat tours required? Or is that a waste of their money? And so we really used our analysts to go back and look at the past 24 months worth of lease ups, when they started, what their pre-leasing timeframe looked like. It was really all over the board, sometimes directed by us, sometimes directed by a client. And he analyzed where we started to get good lead generation, at what point we started to get solid lead generation, and then at what point we were able to start to convert and get leases. And so that's guided a lot of our most recent recommendations, and has also been really great content for us to discuss during pitch meetings to try to win deals. I don't want to give you the details as to what his discovery was, but it was really important to us to have some data to back up. Look, we have all of this recent experience, and this is what the data is telling us, so we can give you the best recommendation, as opposed to saying, I feel like it would be good to start 60 days before.
Yeah. Well, we'll just press you for that off the air, but that is really interesting. So is that then your, as Reed was saying, like your, if it's not stacks because everything's custom, I'm more curious, and again, where you're comfortable, but of what you guys are bringing to the table, because if as a startup, I know you guys often refer to yourselves as a startup, you have now a good track record, right? Because now you've got several years, so it's probably better now than it was then as far as the data that you could present. But I'm just wondering, back to Reed's go-to-market comment that he said earlier, is it more about, because it's lower fee is not always better, right? And I don't know where you guys sit in that, but as we've talked to different management companies, it's all over the board. Some are like, we charge like well above, and some are like, well, we go for the discount, but certainly like the discount doesn't mean the owner's going to do better. So just curious how you approach it. Is it more about like, here's the budget, here's what we think we can do, and by the way, we're bringing this experience and this data expertise with, or is there kind of a different, and I know each thing is custom, each presentation is custom, but there must be some common threads. Like we talk about Digible's uniques, and one of our uniques, I don't know if you've ever talked to Joya about this before, but one of our uniques is we get what you do. And it's just that we're a student of the industry. We want to learn all that we can to blow your mind. That's what we say internally, except we throw freaking in there. We want to blow your freaking mind. But yeah, that's one of our uniques. We get what you do. So wondering kind of what you guys are for your uniques.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit of the secret sauce, to be honest with you. I will tell you the overarching theme is we deliver results that matter. I know I said that earlier in the meeting, and so it's that part of that discovery, understanding what the results are that they're going for. But then there are some subcategories under that that really dial into specifics, whether it's around operations or it's around facilities or marketing. And so the stacks really come in when some ownerships are a yardie shop, and that's all they're going to do. And so a lot of the stacks are really designed to tie into a property management software, and then what technology integrates or works well with that, and then what's included in that stack. And for the most part, we are a real paid shop, but we also have several clients on Yardi, and we're well versed there as well. But then there's all the one-off technology components or add-ons, and it's really specific to the asset, the submarket, the age of the asset, and the demographic as well.
Yeah, well, this will be my last one. I'll let you continue with your next. But on your back to that point, I totally get where you're going with the results that matter, because in our world, everyone talks about calls or cost per conversion, and we are quick to say not all calls are equal, not every conversion is equal. So let's really talk about what matters. So I totally get I'm sure there's a relationship there. But on the stacks of the technology, I also get that, right? Because if you're a Greystar or Lincoln or whoever, you have to, there's certain things that you need to put in as a processee.
Processes is when it's plural. That's all I'm saying.
It's trying to pick on you. Certain processes you got to put in place so that you can scale rapidly, and you can do it off of someone that maybe hasn't been in the position for a long time and still maintain quality. So I'm wondering, as you guys are getting larger, because you've got some ambitious goals, at least the last time I talked to you about this. So how much do you allow people to customize I'll say the programming, as you used earlier, of a property versus kind of being the one-off thing, right? Because if you get too many of the one-offs, because we're going to use this system and that, whatever.
It's terribly inefficient. It's hard to have training and support around the one-offs. And that's really one of, I would say, the biggest challenges in third party that we face. And so ultimately, it is a conversation, letting the client know, look, you've hired us because you trust us to do the job. And we've vetted these programs. We have training and processes in place to ensure they're successful, to monitor them and to support them. But we are also flexible. And we have to remind ourselves that it's not our investment. We're here to manage and make the client as successful as possible. But if they are adamant after us trying to talk them through, a solution that we offer that is competitive with something they may want to put in place, if they're still passionate about moving forward, then we try to look at it as an opportunity for us to, vet a new product and make sure that what we have in place actually is the best and makes the most sense for all of our clients.
Well, you actually hit our second unique. Our second unique is that we're flexible. So it's like we're flexible within the framework, no crappy fees, startup costs, like as you're saying about technology, KPIs, like all of that stuff, we'll make a strong recommendation, but we won't force it on you. And if you have the right data to back it up and the right case studies, a lot of times it's a pretty easy sell, because you've thought through this, you have way more on this than I do. Totally. Let's go your way. Yeah. All right. Well, back at you.
Cool. Well, I want to get more inside the room with you on these pitches, and I don't think this is going to be stuff that you can't talk about, but obviously no big deal if it is. I'm curious. I think about, again, just personally my background, how things changed in media with the sellers and big presentations. And it used to be typically just, whoever the rep was, maybe the manager was on the call, and, depending on the size of the opportunity, maybe, there's some senior management that was involved, and that was it. And then things got a lot more complicated for TV, for radio, for newspaper. And that was with of course, disruption with digital. And so a lot of these companies, and this is just a little bit of background, but teeing you hopefully up a little bit here, Joya, started hiring digital, experts, and they were expected and needed to be on the call. And it evolved even further. And for me in Austin, and even here in Denver before we did this, we would bring, as I would describe them, almost the artist for some of the services that we would offer. And a good example would be video, where it's like you'd never think to bring a videographer in there on a sales pitch. But often, the person that was really executing, and where I'm going here is sometimes it could be a data analyst, is now part of that pitch, just so that it's not coming from just, we'll say, me or David trying to explain all this stuff. It's like we actually do have some really fantastic experts that can speak eloquently and help you better understand, what we're going to be delivering. So with multifamily, I'm still, I consider myself an outsider still, although I'm getting there. But as far as past, present, future, it's a thread that we often hit with people that we talk to, especially, what we see or perceive as experts. Talk to me, if you can, a little bit about the past, what these pitches look like, who was in the room, and if that's changed much today. And if you're, imagining something a little bit different a few years down the road. And again, maybe it's not the wrong, way to try and set you up, but I would assume data analysts, are playing a bigger role, or it could be something in the realm of technology that enters the conversation. And therefore you guys sometimes want to bring additional people in order to win business. So
yeah, so I think
a lot to throw at you, but hopefully you get it. The past, present, future, like who's in the room, what does it look like now on acquisition?
Yeah. So you are very close to one of our unique kind of selling points and things that we touch on in our pitch. And I won't go into too much detail, but I think you're headed in the right direction in some of the things we touch on. But previously, because we were a startup and we weren't resource rich when we first started. The people in the room in the pitch were myself, Marcy, the president of our company, and Holly Casper, who's our senior VP over operations. But since we have been able to grow and add a lot of support resources and really identify experts that are unique within specific disciplines, depending upon the client's goal or how big the deal is, we will bring in different team members from different areas of the company. It could be facilities. If facilities is important to the discussion, if this is going to be a rehab community, we'll bring in our director of facilities. You guys know Sarah Randolph, and oftentimes she's giving me cliff notes, and our data analyst is providing cliff notes and information for the pitch. But there are definitely times when they're included in the room and even travel for it.
Cool. Well, that's interesting. And I was going to ask you to go back even further, but I won't. So now, like when you have these folks, what specific to marketing, because we talked a little bit about it could be occupancy, it could be leasing velocity as far as their KPIs, their goals. But when it's your time to shine, it's like, okay, now let's really talk marketing. Where does the conversation usually go? Again, we know that every conversation's different, but what are some of the themes, if you will? Do they put a higher priority seemingly on branding, since a lot of, your clients are lease up, or are they talking technology with you? Are they talking data? Are they talking like market mix? What are you hearing from owners and investors when it gets to the marketing?
All of it. And they will dive into specifics depending on the asset itself. So if it's a lease up, there's definitely going to be a larger discussion around branding and the demographic and the current competitive set. Just how they're positioned and how we would see this being positioned in a different way, but still able to attract, that target demographic. Communities that are already out of the ground and have an established brand, it may just be talking about what their current lead generation strategy is, what we're able to kind of glean from some of our own research, and then any opportunities or recommendations we would make as far as a change in strategy. And then always technology, especially with COVID now, talking about what technology the on-site teams have available to them, and then what tools do they have. 360 tours have been around for a long time, and they are great to have, but boy, the communities that didn't have them when we went into quarantine were certainly at a disadvantage. And so it certainly speaks volumes to say that some of these tools that you think are just bells and whistles could serve a larger purpose in the long run.
Yeah. Well, that hits a little bit of Reed's slight question of like the future. So do you believe, and maybe that I'm jumping too far out of field right now, but do you have an opinion on, is the expectation going to change for a third-party management company now from ownership and what the discussion is versus before? So you mentioned like the COVID thing. So there are some organizations here in Denver, like Red Peak, that it was like in January that they already had an action plan and a playbook around here's what's going to happen in worst case scenario. And so there's certainly these arguments of how much time do you spend, I forget who we were talking to that said this exactly, but they're like, how much time do you spend planning versus how much time you spend doing things? Because you can plan all damn day and never get anything done. But I'm just wondering, like, I'm sure now you guys have a playbook for this, right? Or something that would happen here. And I'm just curious if this is going to change expectations on third-party management moving forward, as far as, do you have different playbooks for these, like, scenarios that may occur, or, and is there different expectations almost on the technology or whatever, where the 360 tours seem like, I feel like everyone's going to be having those moving forward. There's like not even an option.
Sure, absolutely. I think what it has done is opened up a lot of conversations around what are the potential risks out there and what are our current protocols. We had to pull together a lot of protocols really quickly, as a lot of management companies did. I'm surprised to hear that there was another. Was it a management company?
Yeah, well, they're a management company. I believe their ownership is actually, well, I think it's actually the Washington State Retirement Fund that actually funds Red Peak. But anyways, they are, although, are they only owner operated? I thought they did third party.
I don't remember.
Shoot. Well, now I don't know. But they have, like, maybe they tend to be mostly A assets here in the Colorado area. And they've got a great reputation for even how they treat the tenants. So, like, a great example is, like, when a tenant moves in, they give tenants, like, here's your cleaning supplies, because they would prefer that you use a certain type of cleaner for your granite countertops and stuff. Whereas, like, when buildings transition from a Red Peak to someone else is like, you're just a number to me. So they do a lot to make sure that that it feels more like a community and to feel safe, and it's very intentional. And their plan is not to grow rapidly. They kind of like where I think they have like maybe 16 properties, but they're like one of the most respected management companies, at least in the Colorado area.
So were there protocols specific to a pandemic?
Yeah. So they were on a Apartment Association of Metro Denver, like, webinar back in like March, where they were talking about, like, hey, when we heard about this in China, and I think maybe it could possibly be tied to, again, like, their connection to Washington State Retirement Fund. So Washington was well aware of the possible risks. And so very quickly, like I said, basically January, they already had plans on, well, if the world shuts down. And it just blew my mind, because it's like, wasn't on my radar or anybody else's radar. But when that webinar came out, they were running the call, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, we have protocols in place for natural disasters, huge conventions, protests, things like that. Those are things that are likely and have happened. I think a pandemic kind of was completely unexpected. And some of our emergency protocols were easy to shift into place. But when you talk about having all of your residents staying at home and having to have limitations on your staff interaction with them, that was somewhat, it was definitely unexpected and unheard of. And so we had to put protocols in place pretty quickly. But I think what it's done is open up the conversation to, what else do we need to be prepared for? What are all the likelihoods, and which ones are the most important that we should start planning for now? What is more likely to happen?
Right. It's kind of, well, it's just one of those things, back to how much time you spend doing that versus, optimizing something else, and what's likely and what's not likely. I mean, Reed and I will, in our late night conversations after a podcast, when he does have a beer in his hand, we'll talk about what ifs. So, like, one of our what ifs this year was like, well, who could take down Amazon? Like, everyone thinks Amazon's an immovable object. It's like here to stay. And then we just did a thought experiment on that. And I think that's healthy to do from time to time, just to exercise the brain and think how things may change. But obviously, like, that, we can't spend every day talking about that sort of stuff, because there's the reality of things. But anyways, do you want to get back to the room, or are you out of the room now?
Well, anything else, Joy, that you'd be willing to offer, or that you think's kind of interesting? Maybe it's about how things have evolved and less about predictions into the future, like with these pitches. But I started with the comments about the experiential presentations. I didn't know if that's something you guys have ever entertained or indulged, or if, that's just not part of the, and again, if that's too much to ask, I
No,
don't think
it's not. It's not too much. It's not too much to ask. We do always like to get creative, and we again through discovery try to figure out what's important to them, and then how can we creatively go after an experience that's going to be memorable. And sometimes the memorable experience is just a really good conversation around the asset itself. But we have done things such as we turned our office into an outdoor garden and threw a garden party. And, I mean, there were plants and flowers everywhere, things hanging from the ceiling, lights. We had it catered and had garden party drinks, and everybody dressed up in garden party theme. So we've certainly gone all out. What has changed is our pitch deck has changed. When we look at our pitch deck, when we first started going out to win business, we laugh at it, quite frankly, now. It seems so elementary, but we won a lot of business with it. So there was some value to being scrappy and elementary at the time. We've improved that over time, certainly. And yeah, so the pitch deck has evolved. The experience is really dependent upon the asset we're going after and if it makes sense. We've had some fun experiences. We used to print and bind copies of every single deck or RFP response. And we actually had a potential client kind of toss it back at us and say, why did you waste all of this paper? And it was an aha moment where we were like, not only are we wasting a couple $100 on printing, it's just terrible for the environment and people just throw them away. And it's been a freeing experience not to have to do that. So that's been a big change for us too. It sounds really insignificant, but
no, it doesn't. And it adds up, and it's all part of your image, I'm sure, from an owner investor. And I know Dave was about to, one other question with owners and investors. It's almost like the, I guess, classic micromanage. You're going to have that from some clients that are higher maintenance, or get more involved. And I
hope
assume
that's not our KW.
No, never. Sarah's a picnic. No, she's great. I've told you that before. We like it when clients are hard on us, demanding. It makes us better. So we love working with you guys. But same has to be true on some level, I think, with you guys, with owners and investors. And I'm going to still steer this or keep this with marketing. Do some of them, are they more hands-on when it comes to the branding, or do you guys make that clear up front? It's like, I'm sure that they're hiring you for a reason, and that's that you do know what you're doing. But I didn't know if there were some aspects of the marketing, and I'll use budgeting as another example. We haven't really talked about that, but how quickly they ask or expect that from you, or maybe you mentioned your SVP of client services, if he already is trying to get in front of that a little bit, where it's like, what's it going to take to market this lease up? What that conversation sounds like, and how much of a sticking point or how involved they get there. Because we know that marketing isn't, all things considered, although this is a little different with third party, but is the biggest, line item. And so therefore it doesn't always get the same attention from, the operators. But bringing it back, are there more hands-on as it relates to marketing, or most of them just kind of let you do your thing, and you don't have to manage that high maintenance, so to speak, investor owner, like in the marketing side of things?
They are definitely more hands-on. I would say about 70% of clients are hands-on, and 30% are more passive. You have to earn their trust, and they start to relax after they've gone through a branding process with you, or maybe you've gotten to a certain lease percentage if it's a lease up. But it's all a question of earning their trust and showing them that you are responsive, you have opinions, and you are really looking out for their best interests. But we have a lot of very hands-on clients.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because I think it's okay to just mention Origin. we're spending more time, and in particular, David's had more exposure to some owners and investor groups, and just, the spectrum, I'll say, and you can take it from here, but just, the kind of questions they're asking us, the level of sophistication. And I think that inevitably would be passed on to you, maybe up front, depending on, again, that kind of gradient as far as their knowledge and comfort level. Some seem really prepared and wanting to talk about digital, and others still seem a little shy or uncomfortable, and they don't know what they don't know. So they just are like, you guys got that.
Yeah, we asked Michelle Smith on her podcast about just about this topic. And as Reed mentioned, so we typically when we started, most of our business was third party, and now we're probably more like 50-50 third party versus owner operated. But maybe it's like 40-40, and then like 20% is ownership now. Yeah. So it's in recent, I'll say this year, it seems that owners are now approaching us because of other referrals from other owners or whatever, or management companies are referring us to owners, and because those owners are looking for marketing on their other assets and they're really happy. And so we're getting more in fact, we have 3 customers now that are owner first, like not an operator, but they're just an owner investment company. And then they're our primary point of contact versus the management company.
Oh, interesting.
And so we have the same situation going on that we typically do, where it's like we have owner reporting calls with them, and then separately we'll have like marketing calls with the third party managers. And what we were asking Michelle Smith was,
is Michelle with Lincoln? Is that Michelle with Lincoln?
Yep. So she went from Graystar to Lincoln. I have to keep telling myself she's not Michelle Myers anymore. She's Michelle Smith. But she was saying that the questions she's being asked have changed quite a bit now too. She said it used to be that owners were not super involved. They didn't have a lot of questions. And now she's saying in the last couple of years, she's seen owners get way more sophisticated, where they're sending her like TechCrunch articles or whatever. And like, hey, how come we're not doing this crazy ad tech thing? And so our question had been like, how much are you having to like educate or deflect or like, join them for the ride? And she said, for the most part, it's just educating. And she feels comfortable enough to do that because she's well-versed and has a lot of experience. But some of the newer marketers to the field, they're like, shoot, I don't know. Why aren't we doing this crazy whatever thing?
TikTok.
Yeah, sure. TikTok or whatever. And it's like, well, this is something that we'd love to do, but I don't know why we don't do it, or like how trustworthy that is, or do you skip your Google campaign to do TikTok, right? And so back to, as Reed was mentioning, we're getting way more exposure to the owners, and they seem just hungry to learn digital and to like try to be able to put numbers to it, versus it seems like when we're introduced to them, they're like, ask them how they do it now. They're like, well, we're told, we think, we feel like this is how it's done, as opposed to having like, I guess, more of a data backing. And it makes sense now. Like if you're an investment company, you want to see the investment style data and projections on how, and the risk, profile of what this would be to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, our perspective is a tiny bit biased, I think, on what the owners are. Part of it's because of the sample size, but the other part is that naturally the folks that we're fitting with, our clients, I think it's not a coincidence that they have ownership that is more interested or willing, has a greater appetite, is all I'm saying, because it still seems to me to be the minority. Like, and I may be wrong here. That's why I was asking you, Joya, is this just a growing, emerging subset of ownership and investors that is now really thirsty for technology, for data, and to really get into it? Or has it grown past that, where this is actually the norm? Like now most investors and owners, because again, part of our sample size, part of it is the clients that we work with. We want it for a reason, like the business, they're working with us because, that is some of the stuff that they're really interested in, or their stakeholders are. So I didn't know if you have a sense for that, if it's like, this is still kind of a minority of owners and investors that have that savvy or showing that interest, or if this is now more the norm, like,
So your original question was how involved they are, and I think brand was a component of that, along with digital.
Right.
And so I'd say 70% of owners are involved, and a large component of that is when it comes to brand development. But certainly, I would say more than half of owners are still asking a lot of questions around digital strategy. They to Michelle's point, they still really need to be educated, and that's our job to help educate them. Again, it's about instilling trust with them, let them know that we're here on their behalf to help kind of facilitate what you guys are doing, to make sure you guys are doing your job. That's why I have Sarah as kind of our guard dog, to make sure that we're squeezing the most out of it that we can. But I also think that clients are, in general, people are much more comfortable with technology now, as cell phones and mobile and everything has shifted. People are more comfortable with the idea of technology. They get it. And so I think they can make those connections more than they could, even 5 years ago. And they also recognize that that's what's driving performance. And so they're getting a better ROI out of digital. And so that's why they're interested. That's why they're interested. That's why they're asking the questions.
And does digital include in their minds ILS, since obviously all ILSs are online, or do they still segment those two? Like when you guys talk through strategy, do they lump that in? Do you guys lump that in? Sorry, David, I didn't mean to. I just quick extension on that.
Yeah, no, I think that some people might look at it differently. Ultimately, that to me is it's still digital. We do segment it. I mean, we there's an ILS strategy, and then there's what you guys do, which is much more complicated. But clients definitely understand that, especially because of all of the money that CoStar has invested in all of their campaigns. I mean, they've built a tremendous amount of brand awareness. So clients are aware of the difference between ILSs and what you guys are doing.
Cool. Well, I was just going to ask how headcount has changed. Meaning, Reed kind of asked about data analysts and some other things there, but the ratio in this industry and expectations have been that. And I was also going to say we have about 10 minutes left, so make sure you get whatever questions you have.
Yeah, I have one other pretty big one that
okay
would take all 10 minutes. But
okay, well, I just wanted to hit, like, it used to be like, okay, well, if you're hiring a third-party management company, the fee is only so much, and you guys have to, and whatever headcount you guys have, comes out of that fee, right? And the ratio of marketer to property is rough. Right? Like you guys, it's like depending on the company, but it could be anywhere from someone that handles 20 brands or someone handles what we see is more the average is a marketer is handling 40 brands. But then we have one customer who they have one marketer for 200 brands, meaning 200 properties. Impossible basically to do the task. But yet I don't know how accepting marketing is such a small portion of the overall budget from an owner, right? And so they haven't put a lot of focus there, but now they're getting more demanding. And so I'm wondering if the ratio and the headcount is changing now because of these demands. And then you guys have to pass that on to them somehow if that's the case, right? If they want one marketer per 10 properties, well, shoot, you gotta somehow the cost has to go somewhere.
Well, interestingly, there hasn't been a lot of conversation around how many marketers. How do you guys divide that up? They're more interested in what the headcount's going to be at the community because that's impacting their payroll costs. But going back to part of our earlier conversation, I really felt like when I was starting to build a team that it was important that I had experts in different disciplines. And so we've got an analyst and we've got a digital marketing manager who is overseeing the portfolio. But then we have traditional marketing managers that are more client facing. They handle a lot of the branding and collateral and some of the boots on the ground strategy. And they have a large load, but luckily, at RKW, we really think that being resource rich is important and it's a differentiator. The more time and attention you can give to an asset, the better it's going to perform. And the same thing with the client relationship, the more time and attention you can give them, the happier that they'll be. So I think that has really helped us. Adding headcount is always a little bit of an uphill challenge because it's a cost. But the owners of RKW are really supportive and understand that is a key differentiator. And I'm hiring right now in case you guys know any great marketing managers.
We actually do know a couple. So definitely connect and let us know what you're looking for. But I have 3 right.
But they would need to be. That's what I was going to ask. Would they need to be local?
Yeah, ideally, I'd like for them to be in the Carolinas.
Yeah,
I know maybe one that may be interested.
So can you run just a few minutes over, Joya, or do you have a hard stop?
For you guys, anything.
You're too kind.
I just know that I'm going to expect double the leads this week. That's all.
All right, noted. I'll put that added pressure on Adam and Megan. We won't go much longer, I promise. But budgeting, I touched on that, but I wanted to hear a little bit more on that piece. And then maybe the bigger one that I was talking about was fair housing. So, but let's start, if you don't mind, on the budgeting. How much, as you talk about, 70% of owners are pretty involved, like when it comes to, the marketing and just in general, I guess, at large. Do they push you much? Like, are they expecting, do you come forward with the formula like in advance? Like, this is exactly how we map that out? Or is there more kind of negotiating, if you will, where they're like, well, we were thinking that it was in, maybe they're still talking in terms of dollar per door, but we were thinking this was going to be $5 per door for this. And you guys were like, no, actually we were thinking 8. How did you get to 8? Talk us through that. Maybe we can get on board with that. So when it comes to the budgeting aspect, where does that land inside of the pitch, the presentation, and how much back and forth is usually spent there?
So during the pitch, there's not a tremendous amount of conversation around the marketing budget. That usually happens after the pitch, when we're still trying to close the deal, or after we've closed the deal. There's always a conversation around that per unit cost, and it's baked into the way our budget template is. So when you're looking at a summary or a roll up, it's going to say right there loud and clear that there's a per unit cost. And so sometimes that can be challenging, especially when you look at these smaller assets that maybe are in a really competitive submarket. And so it is a question of having conversations, explaining strategy, talking about opportunities. Just for example, we have a lease up in place right now, and they don't have great visibility from a major thoroughfare. They're somewhat tucked away. Any signage opportunities are going to be pretty challenging. And I was really upfront early on in the budget process with the client that it was going to take a lot of digital. We were going to have to be pretty aggressive on the digital side to drive people to this community, simply because of the lack of visibility. And there's been some back and forth and pushback, but ultimately the client was like, we've worked with him previously, and we had earned enough trust to test it. And the good thing is we can always pull back if we're getting more leads than you want, which I don't think I've ever heard. We can always pull back.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for those insights. So fair housing, given the climate, obviously, of the country right now, we're expecting to hear probably more from our own clients asking about, how we're managing that. I mean, first it was COVID, but now it's focused more on, what's going on in and around the country. And it was already a sensitive topic. I feel like one that's really been emerging over the last year or two since the complaint with HUD and Facebook. But just didn't know if you're already
recent lawsuits, right?
Right. Yeah. Lawsuits as well. Exactly. So I didn't know if maybe it's too early. You haven't had another pitch since, the protests and what, things that have been going on, but just how active is that thread in presentations now? Has it even come up, or is it more reactive where, with owners and investors, like they, a year after you guys have already won the business, that might come up in a conversation? Or is that something you guys head off up front, just so you guys know there have been lawsuits, we know what kind of climate we're dealing with, and the good news is that X, Y, and Z, like these are the measures or our vendors take in order to make sure that we're in full compliance?
Yeah, it's really our responsibility as their property management company to be the experts in that space and to guide them. Sometimes we've been asked to push the boundaries, and it's being upfront about the potential risks, what we are willing to do and not willing to do. And then if they stomp their foot, then we have to have a conversation about, putting that in writing, that any risk or responsibility we wouldn't be responsible for. And as a matter of fact, Sarah and I just recently, it must have been last week, had a conversation around a request as it relates to some services that you guys offer and some fair housing potential fair housing complications. And I told her that, we need to go back to the client and educate them. It's our job to help look out for their best interest and reduce their risk and liability. And so it may just be an education. It might just be education at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly won't name names, but there are some other companies that we work with that have been on the more conservative side. I don't know if they're using that as a tactic in any way to actually win business as we talk about these pitches, but where, there's edicts where it's like, we fully mitigate any risk, because of this is part of what, is allowed or isn't, within our marketing, our digital strategy. And, I don't know if that's, going to become a thing. That's why I asked you just if that's something that's come up. But if more lawsuits hit, you'd almost expect it's like, well, now we need to get in front of this right away and let them know, exactly what measures we're taking. So that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. Generally it's not a sexy topic for a pitch. You get an hour of someone's time and the last thing you want to do is dive into their housing.
Right.
But we've touched on that for transitions where we see that there are some violations in place with current management. And so just want to share and point out that there, might be a lack of education and you need to really be aware of what liabilities there are. But that is, does not take up very much time in the pitch. It's not something that they're most interested in. And it's really our responsibility to educate them and to help protect them.
Cool.
Well, my last question was what?
I just want to say I know we're not going to abruptly hang up, but I have my goofy,
okay.
One question I definitely want to know from Joya.
Well, my last question is, you mentioned transition. And so how often, because you guys are, as you said, a lot of the portfolio is lease up. So what happens when the current ownership, you guys get it leased up, you've done a phenomenal job, everyone's high-fiving and chest bumping, and then it's like, great, building sold, because that was the goal. So, right. So what, do you guys ever get to follow on, or is it kind of like, you got to that's just part of it? Right? Is that it's going to go somewhere else?
Well, our goal is always to try to maintain management and for new ownership to bring us on. Sometimes there are existing relationships in place that just prevent that from happening. And then sometimes new ownership manages on their own. They're self-managed. And so there was never an opportunity for us. But, our goal is to do a really good job. So if there's ever a sale, there's a good story behind why it makes sense to keep us in place.
Yeah. Well, just on our side, it's probably maybe 10% of the time, if that we ever get to continue on.
Really?
So if we get to help like someone do a great job, and we'll get introductions from whoever, they're like, hey, here's your new contact. And every time we reach out, it's just, we have not connected. It is, like I said, it's like 10%. What may happen is, like, we had a case, this just happened, where a property moved on. We followed up and we were like, we sent some videos over of like, hey, let's just walk you through how the history of this project or whatever. And we heard nothing. And then it was, I think it's been 6 months. 6 months later, they came back to us and said, hey, we want to talk to you guys. We were excited to get to work with you or whatever, to hear from you guys before, but we just had to move quickly because of the transition time or whatever, and had to put things in place. But we have this new asset that you've never seen before that we want to use you guys on. So it seems like, and I know there's typically a hectic handoff when it changes. Okay, maybe not, but it seems oftentimes to us hectic, where it's like, here you go. And then then whoever it goes to kind of has their preferred relationships, or they just don't have time to vet. And so they move along.
Yeah. I'm surprised to hear that. I would think that it might be easier to keep you guys in place. There'd be they wouldn't have to go dark. There wouldn't be a lot of hiccups. I'm perfectly happy to give you guys recommendations as long as it's, right now all West Coast, so we can kind of keep you guys to ourselves. So I'm okay with you maintaining a small presence in the Southeast. That's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Not trying to slide that in there. More of just, it's interesting, right? About because our
but you know what, David, in fairness, when we take over, most of our deals go to you guys. So we have an existing relationship in place, and So if for us, it makes sense. We have partners that we like to work with. So it may be the same case.
Totally. Yeah. And Nicole says the same thing. She's like, frankly, I would not be happy if we had like a 90% or whatever, like conversion rate, because she thinks that that we should be doing a good job of holding on to our clients and building the relationship. And that so anyways, it's when we normally pitch someone, our close rate is probably like 70-80%. And if you took that 24 months out, it would probably be 90%. But if it's within 6 months, it's probably 70%. But it's that transition where we haven't cracked that nut yet on how to just make an impact, because as you said, there's a lot that you lose in the transition. All right, Reed, I know we're against time, so hit your.
We're not too bad. We're just 4 minutes over. So one last, I'll call it professional question, then come the unprofessional ones. And it's just a lightning round, Joya, so it won't take long. But we've focused all the conversation really about the initial pitch. We know, obviously, working with you, that you have your watch list, and everybody else does too. So I'm just curious, generally speaking, how often, and hopefully it's not much because that wouldn't make us look good, but do you find yourself having to come in to reassure or maintain the business? Because we have to do that ourselves. That's part of, I feel like most companies, but just, the retention strategy, and then, what that looks like. Is it typically just getting on a call? It's like, here's the data, here's how we're going to pivot, or is it more than that for you guys? Like, customarily, like when you're dealing with a property that's struggling, like to what extent do you guys have to go or typically go in order to save business?
When you say, okay, so you're talking about myself or Marcy, an executive.
Yeah. When you see that business is compromised, do you feel like that's 10% of my job is retention and having to field those conversations, or is that too high, too low?
I've never thought about putting a percentage on that. We are constantly on calls. We have weekly calls. With clients. Now that's generally the regional manager and the manager, and then a marketing manager joins those calls monthly or every single week if they're in lease up, depending on where they're at in their lease percentage. So retention is ongoing. It starts the day we pitch. And it doesn't ever really stop. And it's not great if they're calling in Marcy to have a discussion on that. And we've been able to overcome that, certainly, but we should be in touch with the client along the way to know that there's some warning signs, and we've exhausted every potential effort to try to overcome whatever failures or issues we're having.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, David may have one to add on here. He usually has a couple left field questions that he asked, but
I got one.
Okay.
Well,
this is
less than 5 minutes.
This is my James Lipton. Do you know that name?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to ask you what you'd be.
You look awfully young.
All right. So if Days, I know you saw this, or maybe you didn't.
Wait, you have to do this as an impersonation. If you're going to put me on the spot like this, you should at least do a Lipton impersonation.
Oh no, that definitely requires a glass of wine or a beer.
Okay.
You're good with impersonation.
I am, but I haven't watched that in a while. And the King, like Will Ferrell, like he have you seen his James Lipton impersonation?
No.
It's hysterical.
So next time that I see you guys
all right,
in 2025, when we're all allowed to get back together at the next AIM.
Right, exactly. Okay, I'll be ready, and probably a beverage in both hands. Okay, so if you had 36 hours in the day, what would you do with the extra time?
Oh, I get 36 extra hours in the day?
No, normal day is 24. You're getting 36 hours. What would you do?
Well, definitely a large portion of it would go to spending more time with my family. I'd probably split that up between work and family.
Cool. If you hit the
one more, I'd like to probably reading too. That's one luxury for me that I feel like I never have enough time to get around to, and it's because of time. So I think reading.
I can relate. Do you do much podcasts? This is the podcast king over here, but like with commuting or when you're working out, or is it just music for you?
So at the beginning of this year, I was like gung ho. I was going to podcast, and I did, and I was, and primarily when I was working out. But I fell off.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
If you're looking for tips or strategy, this is the guy to talk to. If you hit the mega lottery, what would you do with the money?
Travel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. This is my classic question, two-part. What would your last meal be? And then if you had to eat the same meal every day for the rest of your life, what would that be?
My last meal would be pasta that my husband makes. He's from Italy, so he makes an excellent pasta. And
What kind of pasta? You have to go a little further than
well,
that.
he makes all sorts of different kinds, but he makes a puttanesca. That reminds me of when we first started dating. So probably that, just because
Nice.
there's nostalgia attached to it.
Yeah.
And then a meal that I could eat at, well, probably filet with a really nice salad on the side and a vegetable.
Yeah. Very sophisticated. What was the worst purchase you've ever made?
Oh my God. Well, just all you have to do is look at my Amazon cart. It's like add to cart all the time, just unnecessary.
So it's a collective
Yeah,
then.
yeah. Ongoing.
And
Online shopping
that,
is the devil. It is the devil, but it's also a
yeah,
savior too for someone working mom. It's great, but
yeah,
it's also dangerous.
no doubt. I very much can relate to that. So last one from me, best vacation.
Oh, I can only pick one.
That's right.
Well, we go to Cape Ann in Massachusetts every year. I've been going since I was a child and used to spend my summers there because that's where all of my family is from. It's just beautiful in the summertime. The weather is incredible, and there's so much of my family. It's like that's home to me. So it would have to be Cape Ann in the summer. I've been to a lot cooler places, but that one it's just touches my heart. It's special.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Great answer. Thanks for sharing that. So did you have one that you want to
Well,
throw in there?
this is always may not end on a high note. Who knows? But I don't know if you've heard. Well, you probably didn't hear, but I always like to ask someone's biggest mistake, and I say this on the, let's say, the apartment world, right? And I always try to make this sound easier because we hired an engineer who's he used to work for the largest telco in Mexico.
Poor guy. I don't know if he knows that you bring him up every time.
I told the story yesterday.
Does he know?
No. He accidentally shut off the internet to all of Mexico. It was down for like 8 minutes, but still, I think that's hilarious that, well, he just shut off Mexico's internet. So I don't know if you can top this one, but I'm still looking for someone to top it.
And now he's working for Digible, so it tells you we're always looking for blue chip talent.
A team of winners. Okay. I've made worse mistakes than this, but just because you challenged me to top this, I don't know anyone could top that, but I'll give you a good laugh. Once at a leadership meeting, there was a regional manager that I supported, and he had before this leadership meeting, he had shown a picture from back in the 70s when he had this big, huge, like motorcycle mustache. What is it called with the curly ends?
Handlebar.
Yeah, he had just this big, impressive mustache, and it was such a hilarious throwback picture. And he was a real fun guy to work with. And so I was shopping one day and saw this shirt that had all these different style mustaches on it. Is that correct? Mustaches? Is it?
It's actually mustaches.
And so I bought this shirt because I was like, I'm going to give it to him at this leadership meeting, and he's going to wear it, and everyone's going to ask to see the photo of him with his handlebar mustache, and it's a great story. He's a great guy. Well, I didn't know and learned that when I gave it to him, he was going to go on stage in front of all of the people at this retreat. And I was telling him, I was like, put it on. And he's like, I cannot put this shirt on in front of this group. And I didn't understand why. And he was like, it said, enjoy the ride. And he was like, do you not know what a mustache ride is? I didn't know what it was. And And it happened to be that, he told the VP over our region, and a lot of people I was the butt of a lot of people's jokes. So
that's up there. That's really
a professional embarrassing moment.
Yeah.
That was perfect.
Well, we owe you, and we're not going to do this now, but we owe you ours. So I don't think we have asked each other that question. So I have some pretty classics myself, but we'll bring that to you again, like you said, 2025, and we get to have that wine again.
All right, I want to know something better than a mustache ride.
Oh man, I have way more than I'd like to admit.
Well, thank you, Joya, for taking the time. This was just awesome. I got just really had a lot of fun here. Is there anything you want to say before we let you go?
No, thank you guys so much for inviting me on. And if you're listening and you're not working with Digible, as long as you're not in the Southeast, I definitely recommend them.
Yeah. She's got a radius of like 100 miles around the Carolinas.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we cherish you as a client. You know that. And we love seeing the success you guys are having. And like I said, can't imagine anybody ever saying no to you and Marcy. So we hope things continue to go the way they are, and look forward to that in person that may or may not happen in the next couple of years.
All right.